Hello everyone, my name is Jen, and for my presentation, I will be talking about prevalent women who made an impact during the American Revolution. I will also be giving a little background about the sources that I used and the different types of publications that the sources appeared in. I am going to start with some of the preconceptions that I had before starting this project. Now, to be honest, I knew that my early preconceptions were going to be tried and tested because I, like many people before me, had thought that women were only viewed as property and probably sat at home with the children being passive characters in all the stories about the revolution. I didn't have a high view of women, I guess, from that time. I thought that I could hear them saying, oh, that's not what we do, that's not a woman's job, and things like that. However, I am really glad that I was wrong, that they were not just seen as little more than baby making machines, and that's all they were good for. They were much more. So, who were these women that turned those preconceptions on their head? Who were these women who were so much more? Let's talk about a few of them. But first, let me tell you about the Massachusetts Historical Review. It is a journal published by the Massachusetts Historical Society. It covered 1791 to 1997 as its predecessor, Proceedings of the Massachusetts Historical Society, and then covered 1999 to 2020 in its current form as the Massachusetts Historical Review. It gives us historical writing about Boston and New England, touching on topics in American history. The Massachusetts Historical Society is the oldest of its kind in the United States. I thought that was really cool that they've been around for so long. The first woman that I'm going to be telling you about is Mercy Otis Warren. Mercy Otis Warren came from two of the most politically influential families in the Boston area, both the Otises and the Warrens. They were both very influential families. Eileen Hunt Botting, in her article Women Writing War, wrote, Mercy Otis Warren was a leading anti-federalist who anonymously printed one of the most important tracts against the U.S. Constitution called Observations on the New Constitution. This was only one of the first of her many different writings that she did. The picture that I have here is a line engraving by an unidentified artist that was based off of a portrait that was made by John Singleton Copley in 1763. Alongside Mercy Otis Warren was Hannah Mather Crocker. She was also a part of two politically influential families in Boston, the Mathers and the Hutchinsons. Botting tells us that Hannah Mather Crocker published the first book-length philosophical treatise on women's rights by an American called Observations on the Real Rights of Women. This depiction that we have of her comes from the Britannica website, and it is by an artist named Hannah Adams. So these women had written works that were two of the earliest historical works by women writers to chronicle some of the central events of the American Revolution. They broke social convention because they used much more impassioned writing than other writers about the times. Botting says that Warren and Crocker's commitments to 18th century egalitarian feminist values also made their conceptions of legitimate revolution more inclusive and democratic than those of either fellow contemporary historians like William Gordon or later theorists such as Hannah Arendt. And that was something that I found really interesting because Hannah Arendt, for example, is a modern historical writer. And I read some of her work, and she is very much not as impassioned as I said before. She has a lot more to say in a very factual based way. And something else that I also found was really interesting about both of these women is that they didn't need to use nom de plumes or pen names because they were able to write as themselves, which also goes to prove against my misconception. Because my early preconception was that they would have to write under men's names because they wouldn't be read as women. The Organizations of American Historians have a magazine called the OAH Magazine of History. It was published by the Oxford University Press from 1985 to 2013. Each issue focuses on a theme or topic with informative articles and current historiography. Jan Lewis's article, Women and the American Revolution, appear in Volume 8, Number 4, in the summer of 1994. Lewis tells us about one woman, Clementina Rind. She became the editor of the Virginia Gazette after the death of her husband, who was the previous owner and editor of the magazine. She was one of the most prominent 18th century Virginia businesswomen. However, she was not the only one. Lewis says that there were other ways that women could contribute to the household economy, and under certain conditions, such as the death of her husband, a woman might engage in a male occupation. They served as inn and tavern keepers, and they sometimes became shopkeepers as well. The image that we see here is a Clementina Rind statue at the Virginia Women's Monument. It is in Richmond, Virginia, and it was something that was pitched and approved by the Virginia State Senate. It includes not only Clementina Rind, but other women who were important to Virginia's history, such as Mary Washington. In her article, Lewis shows where many of my preconceptions came from. Let me read to you this passage about the proper female demeanor. It was generally believed that women, especially those of the elite, were to be modest, retiring, chaste, and sweet. Nonetheless, there is an abundant evidence that many women were bold and assertive. We have accounts of Virginia women who spoke back, went to cockfights, and traveled around the countryside unchaperoned, which is something that was completely unheard of in this time. One of my sources is a graduate thesis by Lindsay M. Rochelle. Her thesis focused on elite women in Lancaster, Pennsylvania during the War for American Independence. I was told to use her sources if I could. One of the sources that I found really interesting was Liberty's Daughters, The Revolutionary Experience of American Women by Mary Beth Norton. She touches on the lives of many women during the American Revolution. Here's another collection of stories about women who throw my preconceptions out the window. Let me read to you a passage about this woman that Norton tells us about, named Elizabeth Parker. She lived in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. She is called a never-wed contemporary. She was termed a sensible and engaging, even very superior woman by her acquaintances, who reportedly had many offers of marriage but refused them all. in 1808 when she was 43 years old, which is extremely old for that time period to have not yet married. Elizabeth lamented the marriage of another spinster. I heard with concern the other day of one of the sisterhoods falling off, she commented. She was a sister who promised to be a rising member, an upright vestal who had seen her seventh luster and demeaned herself with strict propriety. But unfortunately, she had fallen in love with an actor, to the utter dismay of her fraternity. I must say, can you be more dramatic? It's so interesting that Elizabeth Parker was so against this marriage of a person who I would assume is her friend, because it's someone of the sisterhood. She talks about the sisterhood of being a spinster and how this woman fell off. She didn't fall in love. She didn't go get married. She fell off. And I think that's just so dramatic. I must admit that Elizabeth Parker's story kind of made me giggle a little bit because I connect Parker to popular culture in the form of Eloise Bridgerton, specifically from the Netflix show Bridgerton. There are books of the same name, but I am talking about Eloise from the show. I must make note that this show is entirely fictional, and I am purposely only referring to Eloise in the show because in the books, she is not entirely against marriage, but in the show, she is blatantly against it, being almost downright hostile about being on the, quote, marriage mart. She often disparages her sister's want to be a wife someday, similarly to Elizabeth Parker's disparaging of her fellow spinster. Also in the books, and I guess in the show as well, even though we are only on season 3, Eloise also has okay feelings about being a spinster. The last journal and article and source that I will be referring to is the Journal of African American History. The Journal of African American History is published by the University of Chicago Press on behalf of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. It was originally known as the Journal of Negro History from 1916 to 2001. However, in 2002, it changed its name to the Journal of African American History and ran until 2018. When the journal was still known as the Journal of Negro History, there was an article titled Phillis Wheatley. Phillis Wheatley is a great example of a woman who changed the game during the American Revolution. She was not only a woman, but she was also Black. In the Journal of Negro History, Volume 24, Edward Sieber writes in his very first line, "Many writers, especially in the field of American literature, have failed to credit Phillis Wheatley with being the second earliest woman poet in America, and one of the first of all American poets to publish a volume in verse." Phillis Wheatley came from Africa when she was 8 years old. She was spoken to by missionaries and soon turned to Christianity. She began writing poetry to mixed reviews. Thomas Jefferson said that her work was beneath the dignity of criticism, but Voltaire was one of the first eminent writers to praise her. At the age of 23, she received a note of appreciation from General Washington. She was told in a letter, "If you should ever come to Cambridge or near headquarters, I shall be happy to see a person so favored by the Muses, and to whom nature has been so liberal and beneficent in her dispensations." So these were just a few of the women that I found that were prevalent in the time of the American Revolution. And they were anything but passive. They were anything more than just baby-making machines. things. We had women who refused marriage, to women who were in writing or in editing, and they went against the societal norms of their time. And I'm actually really proud to say that I was wrong about them. This is my bibliography for all of the images that were in this presentation. Mary Otis Warren by an unidentified artist. Hannah Mathers Crocker by Hannah Adams. Voices from the Garden, the Virginia Women's Monument by the Virginia State Senate. Claudia Jessie by Netflix. And Phyllis Wheatley by Scipio Moorhead. The written sources that I used was Women Writing War, Mercy Otis Warren and Hannah Mathers Crocker on the American Revolution by Eileen Hunt Botting. Women in the American Revolution by Jan Lewis. A Revolution at Home, Elite Women in Lancaster, Pennsylvania During the War for American Independence by Lindsay M. Rochelle, and in turn from her, Liberty's Daughters, The Revolutionary Experience of American Women by Mary Beth Norton. I also used Phyllis Wheatley by Edward D. Sieber. And that's my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a great summer. Bye.